Hi guys, my name is Blake. Welcome. I wanted to talk about the books that I read in August. So in August, I managed to participate in the Orilium Magical Readathon, and I wanted the position of Necromancer. And for that, I had to read 8 books, which I did do. I also managed to get the Bog Cataloger extracurricular activity. So overall, I managed to read 9 books in August, which is a pretty good amount for me. And I have quite a mashup of genres here, which is pretty unusual for me because I don't normally stray too far outside of fantasy. But I had some book club picks and things, so let's just get into it. The first book I have for the O in Animal Studies is Soulkeeper by David Dalglish. And in this world, we are following Devon, who is a Soulkeeper. And Soulkeepers are kind of acting like priests or healers for these people. And suddenly this black cursed water just washes across the land and curses and just destroys everything in its path. And with this black water comes monsters awakening from thousands of years of sleep, and the ancient magic of the world is waking up. And the Soul Keepers have to take on this role of monster slayers to protect the people. And that is the setup for this book, essentially. I really had a great time with this, and I think that this book is incredibly underrated. I feel like it has a lot of elements that a lot of people would like. So we are in this very dark and bleak world, and we are following these characters who are morally good, who constantly want to do the right thing, even though they question their faith, their purpose, their goals, and they are really struggling in the times of this world. And we have, these monsters waking up, and we have these supernatural creatures, we have guns, we have swords, we have elemental magic, we have wizards. There are a lot of great elements in the story that I think a lot of people like, and I think they are pretty popular in the fantasy genre. The monsters and the humans of this world are very different. They have different faiths, different beliefs about the creation of their world. They have different views on magic. Some monsters are friendly, some monsters are evil. Some monsters have become evil that were once good. We have fairies, we have a really evil, sadistic villain that we really don't know a whole lot about yet. And I feel like I just loved the world building in this. It was very interesting, and how their religion is tied to their world and the magic system, which I also liked. And I really enjoyed the monsters in this. That was my favorite aspect. I really loved at the beginning and the ending. I do feel like the middle was a little slow, a little meandering, but the second and third books do look smaller, so I do think that we will tighten up the plot and the pacing a bit there. For the O in Conjuration, I read Warbreaker by Sanderson, and I absolutely loved this book. So in this book, we're following 2 sisters named Vivina and Siri, and Vivina is the oldest daughter of this kingdom, and her father has trained her all her life to go marry this god king of this other kingdom. And right before she's supposed to go, he changes his mind because he doesn't want to send Vivina, his favorite daughter. He wants to send the younger one instead, which is Siri, and she has absolutely no training. She doesn't know anything about this country or its customs. She is completely lost and in the dark about why he has sent her. He believes that war is coming, and he thinks that Vivina, the oldest daughter, the one who has been trained in politics, would be the better to keep behind in the event that Siri is murdered or taken captive. We also follow a god who is named Lightsong, and he was incredibly hilarious. His comedic relief was on point throughout the entire book. He is a god, but he does not believe that he is a god, and he doesn't act like a divine being. He just feels like he is a regular guy, and he wants to know who he was before he was a god, but he has no memory of that time. And I feel like I just loved everything about this world. So I think that these are Sanderson's best female characters, in my opinion. We follow Lynn in The Final Empire, which is the only Mistborn book that I've read so far. But I feel like she's just really in her head as a character. But in these characters, I feel like they've really got a lot of development, and I really knew who they were. And I also think that this was some of Sanderson's best relationship work, whether that was platonic or in a relationship romantically. I have only read the Stormlight Archive books and the first Mistborn book so far, so I can't speak for the entire Cosmere as a whole. But the Stormlight relationships I've just never really been interested in. I can't stand Shallan as a character, so maybe that's why. And I didn't care for the relationship in The Final Empire either. But I feel like I have to kind of change my mind on Sanderson's approach to romance in books, because I feel like the romance in this was fantastic. It was wholesome, it was a slow burn, it was really just well done. It was a minimal aspect, but like I really saw the progression of their growth, and I really loved that. And Lightsong has got to be one of my favorite Cosmere characters. I definitely don't think that he beats Kaladin, but he is quite up there. This book was at times very emotional. There were a lot of twists and turns, some that I was not expecting. And I filmed a whole reaction video that will go up at some point for this, but I just had an incredible time with this. And it was also my favorite magic system by Sanderson as well, because it has to do with breaths, and every person in this world has a single breath, but you can give breaths away, and gods have many breaths, and the more breaths you have, the more heightened your senses are, and you can give life to things around you. And it also has a lot to do with the colors of the world and what that plays into their senses. I just loved it. Hands down, the best magic system. For the qualified in Conjuration, I read Wesley Chu's The Art of Prophecy. And in this world, we are following Jin, who was supposed to be the chosen one. He was supposed to vanquish the evil, and there has been a prophecy foretold about him. But the prophecy was wrong. And this Grand Master of martial arts is this older woman named Tashi, and she sees that Jin is just a spoiled, trained brat, that he is not capable of doing much of anything for himself. And she decides to train him. And that is what I was told from the summary of the book. And I feel like I was a little misled, because I was expecting this to be a mentor-student kind of book, but it's really not. They're together in the beginning, but they are separated for a large period of the book. So I went into it with that kind of expectation, because I love the mentor-student trope, and that's not what this was. In fact, there are a lot of things about this book that I was not expecting. I gave this 4 stars. This book takes the chosen one trope and it really just spins it on its head. Everything, actually, every trope that where I thought I knew where this was going, it didn't go in that direction. And everything was kind of a surprise, and I really enjoyed that. I feel like it takes a lot of guts for an author to take a really popular trope and to do something new with it. And I definitely think the author succeeded in this. I loved the martial arts aspect. I loved the Asian-inspired setting. And we also follow 2 other perspectives as well. So with the 4 POVs that we're following, they provide different settings because they're from different parts of the world, and they have different beliefs and they have different views. So we really get to have a nice, well-rounded view of the world in this first story. I do think that there is a lot more in terms to come in the world building and the magic system. But I think this was a fantastic start to a series. For Distinguished in Conjuration, I read The Fall by Ryan Cahill, and this was a novella. I always think that novellas are really hard to rate review and talk about because they are so small and they're such a small portion of the worlds that they represent. So I'm just going to read the summary to you directly from the book. It says, the Order has watched Etheria for thousands of years, but there are those that believe that the Order is corrupt. The city of Ilhan, I'm probably butchering all these things, is on fire. Dragons fill the skies and traitors fill the streets. This takes place 400 years before of Blood and Fire. And this is the prequel novella to the Abound and Broken series, which I've been really interested in. I've been seeing it everywhere. And I really wanted to start with a Blood and Fire because there is a recommended reading order based on your reading preference. But in this order where you read the novella first is what he recommends if you just want to be thrown into the world. And I don't normally like taking the approach of novellas first, especially because I'm very picky about novellas. But I did end up really enjoying this one. I gave it 4 stars. And we really are just thrown into the world in this one. We don't really know what's going on, who to trust, who we're following. We're just, bam, in the middle of a betrayal. And that's what we see. This is less than 100 pages, but I feel like it was well written, and it definitely got me intrigued for the rest of the series. And I will say the fact that the novella is free on the author's website is a really big influence in why I picked up the novella first. But I'm glad that I did, because it definitely motivated me to pick up the first book. So I think that the novella did its job. And that's really all I can say about it without getting into too much detail. There is an elemental magic system. We have these soul blades, which I guess are like shard blades, is what I was feeling like when I read them. And we also have dragons, which was honestly enough to sell me on the world. Next, we get to the demonology subject, and for this, I read The Inheritance Games by Jennifer Lynn Barnes. For this book, we are following our main character, and she is a teenager. She is very poor. She's living in her car. Life is not great, and she is invited to this will reading for this billionaire named Hawthorne. She's never heard of him, doesn't know anything about him, but she is required to be at this will reading. So she thinks it's all a mistake, and she goes anyway. And this billionaire leaves all of his billions to her. And he has 4 grandsons. You see where this is going, don't you? Yeah. And they think that this girl is a clue because their grandfather loved riddles and puzzles, and they think that this girl is a clue to figure out. And our main girl is like, I'm also interested in knowing why he left me all this money, so let's solve this mystery. But there is further complications because she is required to live in the house with his family that has been slighted by their grandfather, and they're very unhappy that old granddad Hawthorne didn't leave them money. She is now a billionaire overnight. She's a teenage celebrity, and someone is also trying to murder her. So I enjoyed the beginning of this book. I was having a good time, but then things quickly took a nosedive, and by the end I was not having a good time. I ended up giving it a 2.5 stars. So what went wrong with this book? I swear everything. So it quickly turned into a high school drama fest very quickly. It was very predictable. I saw things coming way before they happened. The characters are, so there is a main love triangle between our main character and some of the other characters. And there are like 10 different teenagers in the story just running around, and they're all interconnected in their own sort of web of love problems, which I didn't like at all. But my biggest frustration with this book was actually how dumb the characters were. So not only were things messy and convoluted, but the character literally did things that made no sense. She's like, I could be hounded by paparazzi. Someone is out to kill me. I am trying to lay low, and yet she sneaks out with this boy because he's hot, who may be trying to kill her. Or someone attempts to murder her, and then her security team is like, well, it has to be someone on the ground. So we're going to keep this between us and not tell people while we investigate. And then she goes and tells everyone. And there's this girl who is cousins with the Hawthorne brothers. And her family also should have inherited the money, but they didn't because it was all given to the main girl. And she tries to become her friend, but she's clearly not her friend. She's like a toxic, mean girl. That's the trope that she fills. And she's just constantly integrating herself into the main character's life. I think the main character's name is Avery. I think. I'm terrible with names, though. And she is horrible to the Hawthorne brothers, to Avery. She's constantly just inviting herself into things. And Avery just lets her. And Avery even tells her secret information, private information. And I'm like, why? Why would you do this? And for a book that is supposed to be about puzzles and riddles, it is not. There is very minimal puzzle riddle solving. So I was let down in a lot of aspects in this book. Next, I have Spells and Incantations. And for this one, I had to read a graphic novel, and I read Lore Olympus by Rachel Smythe, Volume 1. I have not read any graphic novels other than the Witcher graphic novel, which I read before, which I didn't enjoy, but I read it on my Kindle. So I attempted to read this one physically because I thought maybe that's why I didn't enjoy the first one. I still didn't really enjoy the graphic novel reading experience. This is a Hades and Persephone retelling, which I do enjoy. Greek mythology. I love a good retelling. I love Hades and Persephone. I liked the graphics of this. I liked the color palette and the art style. It was very bubbly, I guess I would say. But Hades and Persephone text each other like teenagers, and it takes place in a modern world. So I don't like the idea of it being in a modern setting, and I didn't like the way that they were texting each other. All of the characters seem immature, but that's pretty standard for Greek gods, I guess. So I had mixed feelings about this one. I gave it 2 stars. This book was a lot of setup. Like, nothing really happened in the volume. And I feel like maybe I would enjoy volume 2 more, since this book was just, I feel like, setting up a story. And now that we have been introduced to the characters, maybe things would be more interesting in volume 2. Cold Storage by David Koepp. And this is a sci-fi thriller horror story. It begins with us following a team that is going to contain a plague outbreak with the military, and this is a very unique type of fungus. It is very smart. It evolves rather rapidly, then goes to a government storage facility, and the government just kind of forgets about it for a long time until 2 night guards who are on security at the storage facility discover that the fungus has broken out. I ended up giving this book 2.5 stars. I was expecting to enjoy this one a lot more than I did. So the author was a screenwriter on Jurassic Park, which is one of my favorite films of all time. And I feel like that's a really tall order. I feel like I went in with my expectations too high. Also, the story does an interesting thing where it gives the fungus its own POV chapters, which is interesting because a fungus with thoughts is pretty unique. The way that it describes things, the way that it thinks about things is interesting. I actually laughed out loud at one point when it said that the fungus was depressed, that it was in a storage facility. and that it couldn't infect people, and just the absurdity of that comment just had me cracking up. And so that is, I think, an interesting take. It wasn't as executed as well as I would have liked. I did not like any of the characters in this either, which I feel like that's always an issue I have with horror type stories. Maybe it's because I know that in horror books, you know, bad things are going to happen to the characters, or they're not going to make it. So maybe in my mind, I just go into horror books expecting to not get attached to the characters, and therefore I don't. But none of the characters really had any development in this. I feel like they could have been easily replaced with other characters. I feel like they only had, you know, 1 or 2 characteristics, and that was it. Next, I have The Tea Rose by Jennifer Donnelly. And in the story, we're following Fiona and Joe, who are a young couple who live in Whitechapel during the time of the Jack the Ripper murders. This is a historical fiction, which I don't normally read historical fiction. I'm not the biggest fan of historical fiction, but this was a buddy read pick. So I went into this completely blind. I saw something about Jack the Ripper on the back, and I was like, oh, cool, it's gonna be like a thriller or like a mystery. It wasn't. We are following Fiona and Joe, who are young teenagers in Whitechapel at the time of the Jack the Ripper murders, and we are following them as they are dating and living their day-to-day lives, and then we follow them over a 10-year period as they are separated and then having to face life on their own and deal with their own struggles and their actions and the consequences of those actions. And that was essentially the setup for this book. I'm not even sure you could call it historical fiction because it was incredibly melodramatic. It felt like a period drama. I saw a lot of amazing rave reviews on this on Goodreads. I think it has like a 4.5 star average or something. I didn't get it. I feel like I didn't read the same book as everyone else. I ended up giving it 2 stars. And I saw a lot of reviewers talking about how they loved the relationship and how they thought it was romantic. I didn't feel that way at all because the relationship is kind of like the main aspect of the book. Because even when the characters aren't together, they're thinking about each other or they're doing things because their motivation is the other person. And I really wish that they had growth as individuals. Like I wish that they were separate people without constantly the other person coming through onto the page. It's like every decision they made was to get to the other person or to be with the other person, or they were constantly thinking about the other person. It was ridiculous, and I didn't think it was romantic at all. In fact, I don't even know why these characters would like each other. I never felt an inkling of a care for either of these characters, which is ridiculous because this book is like 800 pages long. I feel like I should have cared somewhat, but I didn't. And then, for 800 pages, the author goes into a lot of descriptions. She talks a lot about, you know, the food and the gowns and the clothes and all of these things. Oh, and tea. She talks about tea a lot, so I did like that aspect. But other than that, we get to the end, and everything is quickly rushed and wrapped up. And there were just so many conveniences at the very end. They were just piling up on each other. And the last book I read was for the Bog Cataloger position, which was Read a Book with Water on the Cover, and I picked up The Girl the Sea Gave Back by Adrienne Young. I've had this on my TBR for a really long time, and I decided to pick it up on a whim. It is a YA fantasy following Vikings, and in this book we have dual POVs. We're following Tova, who comes from a Viking clan, and she is kind of taken in by another clan because she can read the runes and she has a special connection with the sisters, and she can see the fate of their people. But because she's an outsider, she is not well accepted, and she has a really difficult time in this society. And the other character that we're following is Halvard, who is set to be a chieftain one day. And these two clans are coming to war with one another, and with other clans, there's just been a lot of conflict. I did enjoy it. I do like a Viking story. I did enjoy the setting. I like the idea of the runes and their beliefs and their religions and kind of their folklore as well. But I do think that the story was incredibly slow. So the alternating chapters where they're both telling us about the same thing felt really repetitive a lot of the time. And we had a really slow build up throughout most of the book. And then in the end, we just had an incredibly rushed ending that was left on a bit of a cliffhanger. But those are all the books that I read in August. Let me know what you guys have been reading, what your thoughts are, or if you've read any of these. I would love to know. And I'll see you again with another video soon. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.